The chamber of the Galactic Council was a masterpiece of light and sound. A great ring of silver metal, it floated in the silent black above the blue-green marble of Alara Prime. In its center, a holographic star map glimmered softly, casting a pale glow on the faces of the gathered delegates. From 100 species they came, with scales and fur and chitin, their forms as varied as the stars they represented. In a seat along the curve marked for minor affiliate species, a human woman sat perfectly still. Her name was Hannah. She was not old, but her dark eyes held a stillness that spoke of deep patience. Her hands were folded on the smooth, cool surface before her, resting beside a simple datapad. She wore the plain gray uniform of a human diplomatic envoy, a sharp contrast to the glittering robes and intricate carapace polishes of the others. She listened. The topic was progress and pragmatism in galactic stewardship. The Kivani Imperium delegate, a being of slender limbs and iridescent skin named XV, was speaking. His voice was a fluid, melodic sound, but the translation crystal around Hannah's neck delivered the meaning in a cool, flat tone. And so we must look forward, not backward, XV was saying, his long fingers tracing a line through the star map, highlighting a nebula rich in minerals. Sentiment is a luxury for young species. It clouds judgment. To preserve a star system, because it is beautiful or unique, is an illogical drain on resources. Beauty does not power starships. Uniqueness does not forge durasteel. A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. The representative from the Tri-System Federation, a stout being with a bark-like hide named Gurm, nodded vigorously. The Kivani speaks truth. Our recent proposal to harvest the crystalline cores of the azure rings was delayed for. What reason? Gurm turned his large, solid eyes toward Hannah's section. Ah, yes. A human survey team filed an objection. They cited the potential disturbance to a non-sentient phototrophic swarm that uses the rings as a nesting ground. Phototrophs. Cosmic plankton. A few clicking laughs echoed from the insectoid delegates. Hannah's expression did not change. She simply watched. This is the heart of the issue. XV continued, a note of theatrical pity entering his voice. Humanity's defining characteristic, it seems, is a stubborn, almost pathological empathy. You extend it to rocks, to gas clouds, to simple biological machines. You weep for a planet's biosphere, while your own colonies struggle. You prioritize the comfort of lesser creatures over the advancement of civilized beings. It is, forgive me, an evolutionary failure. A branch that grew too soft, too focused on feeling rather than thinking. The words hung in the air. They were not the first insults, but they were the most direct, spoken in this formal forum. Previously, such comments had been whispers in corridors, subtle condescensions in committee meetings. Now, they were public record. Hannah felt the eyes of the chamber shift to her. She felt the weight of the stares, some curious, many dismissive, a few gleeful. She saw Min, a young Ilaren aide who often brought her data reports, looking at her with wide, worried eyes from his post near the door. His people were gentle, herbivorous, and he had always been kind. G. Arm saw an opening and took it. It affects your security, your standing. Your morality makes you weak. You refuse to preemptively strike against the Re-Corps marauders because they have not attacked a civilian target yet. You let them nibble at your borders, costing you ships and lives, all to keep your conscience clean. A strong species crushes threats. A logical one eliminates variables. You do neither. You simply feel sorry for them. XV added the final blow. He leaned forward, his iridescent skin shimmering under the lights. The council was built on strength, on logic, on the ruthless and glorious pursuit of advancement. Species like yours, human, cling to the past. You are a drag on our collective potential. You are, in every measurable sense, unfit for the hard realities of true cosmic society. Perhaps you should focus on tending your gardens and leave the business of the galaxy to those with the will to do what is necessary. Silence. It was a crushing, absolute silence. The judgment had been passed, not in a declaration of war, but in a statement of contempt. Humanity was declared obsolete, a faulty model, a sentimental error. Hana moved. It was a small movement at first. She looked down at her datapad. With a tap of her finger, she sent a single, pre-written command. Then she stood. The motion was smooth, unhurried. The gray fabric of her uniform did not rustle. Every delegate watched, unsure what to expect: an outburst of anger, a tearful plea, a fiery speech of defiance. Hannah gave them none of it. She placed her datapad into the small carrying case at her feet. She fastened the clasp. She then placed her hands flat on the desk before her, and she bowed. It was not a deep bow of submission, nor a shallow nod of acknowledgement. It was the formal, precise bow of a diplomat closing a meeting. A bow that said, "This discussion is terminated." Without a single word, she turned and walked toward the great arched exit of the chamber. Her boots made no sound on the polished floor. Min the aide instinctively stepped aside, his mouth slightly open. The heavy doors, sensing her approach, slid open with a soft hiss. She passed through them, and they closed behind her, sealing the chamber once more. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then XV let out a soft, trilling sound, a Kivani chuckle. "It seems we have finally shamed them into silence. Perhaps there is hope for them after all. To recognize their place is to leave it." Gurm grunted in agreement. "Good. Now we can vote on the Azure Ring's proposal without childish interference. The phototrophs will have to find a new home." The council moved on. The star map flickered as new data was called up. The business of the galaxy continued. The human seat remained empty, on the bridge of the human diplomatic vessel Steadfast, orbiting high above Alara Prime. Captain June looked at the alert on his screen. It was a single code word from Hannah: cicada. He did not smile, nor did he frown. His face, weathered and calm, simply set into a mask of resolve. He turned to his communications officer, a young woman named Yuna. "Execute protocol cicada. On my mark. All vessels, all outposts, all personnel. Mark." Yuna's fingers flew across her console. A single, encrypted, galaxy-wide burst transmission shot out from the Steadfast. It traveled at speeds faster than light, hopping through relay stations humanity had built and maintained for the Council. It reached every corner of Council space where a human lived, worked, or walked. On the mining asteroid T-77, Foreman Jin was in the middle of recalibrating the atmospheric scrubbers. His datapad chimed. He read the message, nodded to himself, closed his toolkit, and walked to the shuttle bay. He did not finish the calibration. In the medical research facility on Lyra Station, Dr. Sue was monitoring a culture of cross-species nanites. Her console flashed. She carefully placed the culture into a stasis unit, erased her personal logs, and left the lab, her white coat hanging on the back of her chair. Across 100 worlds and 1,000 ships, the same thing happened. Humans stopped what they were doing. They closed up shop. They walked away from half-eaten meals, from active terminals, from ongoing conversations with confused colleagues. They boarded their shuttles and their ships. There were no goodbyes, no explanations, just a quiet, orderly, and total withdrawal. Within 6 hours of Hannah leaving the council chamber, the human embassy on Ilara Prime was empty. The plants in the atrium were watered. The lights were off. The doors were locked. On the front steps, a small maintenance droid, its programming finally triggered, placed a sign on a stand. It read in Common Galactic and several other major languages: "Humanity withdraws." effective immediately. In the council chamber, the debate on the azure rings had just concluded. The harvest was approved. Min, tasked with fetching a data crystal for his superior, took the long way around the ring's outer corridor. He found himself standing before the human embassy. He saw the sign. He peered through the transparent doors into the dark, silent lobby. A cold feeling, entirely new to his peaceful species, coiled in his stomach. It was not just emptiness he saw. It was a void. A silence where there had always been a presence, a calm voice, a listening ear. He thought of Hannah's bow, her silent exit. This was not shame. This was something else. This was an ending. He touched the cool glass, and for the first time in his life, Min felt afraid. The first week was a quiet celebration. On Elara Prime and across the core systems of the Galactic Council, there was a sense of relief. The human seat in the Great Ring remained empty, a fact noted with satisfaction by delegates like XV of the Kivani and Gurm of the Tri-System Federation. Committees ran more quickly without the human delegate, Hannah, asking her careful questions about long-term ecological impact or cultural preservation. The vote to harvest the crystalline cores of the azure rings passed without objection. Engineers began drawing up plans immediately. You see? XV said to a colleague as they took nectar in a viewing lounge. Efficiency, uncluttered by emotion. The universe is for the taking. Gurm expressed similar thoughts in blunter terms during a strategy session. No more whining about the little creatures. No more delays. Progress, pure and simple. The silence from the human worlds was seen as an admission of defeat. They had been shown their place, and they had slunk away to tend their gardens, as predicted. News feeds briefly mentioned the withdrawal, framing it as a minor species deciding to focus on internal matters. Life moved on. The first sign was small. It happened on terraformed Sector 7, a collection of domed agricultural biomes that provided grain for 20 systems. The climate was a delicate, engineered balance. One morning, the head grower, a Telosian named Crix, noticed the humidity levels in Biome 3 were rising too fast. The readouts on his screen flashed a mild warning. He tapped in the standard correction code. The system accepted it, but the humidity continued to climb. A faint mist gathered on the inside of the great dome. Crix frowned. This was Jin's system. The human engineer Jin had a special touch with the environmental processors. He called them the breath of the place, and would often listen to the hum of the circulators, claiming he could hear a subtle difference when they were off by a fraction. Crix had always found it strange. A machine was a machine. But Jin was gone now, recalled with all the others. Crix tried the manual override. The vents opened wider, but the mist turned into a light rain within the biome, soaking the ripe golden grain. The temperature began to drop. It's fine, Crix told his worried assistant. It's just a glitch. The central AI will compensate. But the central AI had been tuned by Jin. Its learning algorithms were based on patterns Jin had installed. Patterns that understood the living rhythm of the plants, not just the numbers on a screen. Without Jin's occasional subtle adjustments, the AI's corrections were clumsy. By the end of the day, Biome 3 was experiencing an unseasonable frost. The second sign was more alarming. At the central medical nexus on Lyra Station, a batch of universal medical nanites failed during a routine procedure on a Gellan ambassador. The nanites were supposed to repair damaged tissue at a cellular level. Instead, they clumped together harmlessly and were expelled. The Gellan was fine, but puzzled. The lead technician, a methodical Bolian named Chol, ran a diagnostic. The results were confusing. The nanites' coordination protocols were degrading. Dr. Su had been the architect of those protocols. She understood that the nanites worked best not as a blunt swarm, but as a community communicating with subtle chemical signals that varied slightly from species to species. She had designed their core programming with a flexibility that others called unnecessary complexity. Chul had the schematics, but they read like poetry next to hard logic. A note in the file, in Sue's handwriting, read, "Remember, the body is not a machine to be fixed, but a conversation to be joined." Chul tried to reinitialize the protocol from scratch. He used the standard council coding language. The nanites performed worse. They became inert. A stockpile of millions of doses, vital for treating complex injuries across dozens of species, was now suspect. A quiet panic began in the medical community. The third sign could not be ignored. The galactic data stream, the network that carried real-time communication and trade synchronization across light years, began to stutter. It developed a strange rhythmic lag. Messages between the core systems and the outer reaches, which usually traveled with instant clarity, now arrived with a 3-second delay. Then a 5-second delay. Financial markets, which relied on perfect synchronization, shuddered. A major trade deal between the Kivani and the Tri-Systems collapsed over a timestamp error, costing millions in credits. Engineers dove into the root code of the network's routing system. They found a labyrinth of elegant, minimalist programming they did not recognize. It was not the standard council code. It was something cleaner, more efficient, and utterly mysterious. It was only when they cross-referenced archival logs that they found the truth. The system had been quietly overhauled 7 cycles ago. The work had been done by a human engineer named Yuna. She had proposed it as a simple optimization patch to reduce energy costs. The council had approved it without much thought, happy to save credits. Now, with Yuna gone, the system's self-correcting functions, which relied on her unique algorithms, were failing. The lag was getting worse. Chul, the medical technician from Lyra Station, was called before a hastily assembled council tech committee. He had worked closely with Sue, just as others had worked with Jin and Yuna. He stood in the now familiar chamber, feeling very small under the gaze of the delegates. "Explain the failure," demanded GRM, his bark-like skin looking dry and irritated. "The systems they are falling out of tune," Chul said, struggling for the right words. The human engineers didn't just build them to specification. They built them to understand. Jin's climate systems listened to the biomes. Sue's nanites listened to the biology. Yuna's network code listened to the flow of data itself. "We have the blueprints, but we don't have their touch." XV waved a slender hand dismissively. "This is sentiment talking again. A machine does not need to listen. It needs to obey commands. Rebuild the systems with proper, logical code." "We are trying," Chul said, his voice strained. "But their work is everywhere, and it is all connected. It is like a tapestry. We have cut a single thread, and now the whole picture is unraveling. We didn't just lose the engineers. We lost the music they were conducting." His words hung in the air, more frightening than any report of weapons failure. It was not an attack. It was a slow, silent fading. The comfort and stability of their civilization was proving to be not a solid floor, but a net held up by countless unseen hands. And those hands had let go. Council leader Kale, an elder statesman from an avian species, finally spoke, his voice grave. "Are you saying our infrastructure is fundamentally dependent on human intuition?" Chul looked at the empty human seat. He thought of Hana's silent bow. He thought of the quiet, competent humans he had known, who always seemed to be fixing things before anyone else noticed they were broken. "Yes," he said, the word echoing in the too quiet chamber. "They didn't just leave. They took the silence with them. And now all the little noises we never heard are becoming screams." In the corridors of the council ring, Min the Alaran aide listened to the reports trickling in. The frost on terraformed Sector 7 was spreading to other biomes. The medical nanite failure was being reported from 5 more stations. The data lag had increased to 10 seconds, and trade was seizing up. He walked past a viewport, looking out at the stars. He remembered the absolute calm on Hana's face. It had not been the face of someone shamed into leaving. It had been the face of someone who had reached the end of a conversation. The celebration was over. The unraveling had begun. The unraveling turned into a slide. It was not fast, but it was relentless. The Galactic Council was not built for this kind of problem. It was built for debates, for trade disputes, for border conflicts, things that could be met with force, law, or negotiation. This was different. This was an absence, a hollowing out. Their civilization had a sickness, and the medicine had walked away. Council leader Kale stared at the reports on his screen. Agricultural output in 3 sectors was down by 20%. Medical hubs were reverting to basic surgical techniques as the nanites failed. The data lag was causing systemic distrust. Contracts were void, alliances strained. The great machine of their society was grinding, its finest gears wearing down, because the oil they never knew they needed was gone. We must find them, Kale declared in a closed session. His feathers, usually sleek, were ruffled. We must open communications. We must negotiate. XV of the Kavani objected. Negotiate from a position of need? It would be an admission of weakness. They left. Let them stew in their irrelevance. And let our biomes freeze? Snapped GRM of the Tri-System, whose own people were now facing grain shortages. This is no longer about pride. My species requires the grain from Sector 7. We need the humans to fix what they broke. They didn't break it, a quiet voice said. It was Chul, the Bolian engineer, who had been invited to provide technical counsel. All eyes turned to him. They simply stopped maintaining it. They built systems that require a human understanding to thrive. It is like a plant that only responds to one gardener's touch. We are not under attack. We are withering. The silence that followed was heavy. The idea was more frightening than any weapon. A weapon could be fought. How do you fight a missing touch? A mission was assembled. It was not a grand fleet that would seem like aggression. It was a single, fast scout ship, the Whisper of Dawn. Its commander was Tay, a veteran explorer known for his calm and caution. His flight officer was Min, the young Ilaran aide. Kale had personally chosen Min. You saw her leave, Kale had said. You understand the tone of it. We need that understanding now. The Whisper of Dawn traveled the old human trade routes. The first stop was the human colony on Verdun, a world known for its lush, engineered forests and peaceful research outposts. When Tay brought the ship into orbit, the sensors found no energy signatures, no signs of life. They descended in a shuttle to the main settlement dot. It was gone, not destroyed, gone. The clearing, where the central compound had stood, was now a meadow of soft, blue grass. There were no foundations, no debris, no scrap metal. It was as if the buildings had been carefully lifted away and the land gently coaxed into healing over the scars. Flowers bloomed where the landing pad had been. A small stream, which maps showed had been diverted through pipes, now bubbled freely through the meadow. The air was clean and sweet. It was the most peaceful, most complete emptiness Min had ever seen. They didn't evacuate, Min whispered, his hand touching the soft grass. They tidied up. The next colony, a mining outpost on a barren moon called Cryas, was the same. The deep mines were sealed with clever, natural-looking rock collapses. The atmosphere processors were gone. All that remained was the untouched dust of the moon, swirling in the silent wind. They visited 5 more worlds. Each was a variation on a theme. Perfect, pristine silence. No messages, no beacons, no warnings. It was a total, polite, and ecological withdrawal. Humanity had not fled. They had closed the door behind them and turned off the lights. The galaxy felt suddenly immensely larger, and the council's space within it felt small and poorly made. Tay's calm was wearing thin. "It is like chasing a ghost," he said to Min in the ship's small galley. "A very polite, very thorough ghost." Their last hope was a navigation buoy at the edge of what had been human space, near a lonely red dwarf star. It was an old model, a public relay for minor trade routes. It was unlikely to have anything, but it was the final point on their list. As the Whisper of Dawn coasted near it, the buoy lit up. A powerful, focused transmission locked onto their ship. It was not an automated signal. It was a recorded message, flagged with the personal encryption code of Diplomat Hana. On the main viewer, her face appeared. She sat in a simple room, dressed not in her council gray, but in a comfortable brown jacket. Her expression was the same as when she had left, calm, composed, utterly serious. "If you are seeing this," Hana began, her voice clear and unhurried, "it means you have come looking. You are likely Tay, or someone like him. And perhaps Min is with you?" "Hello, Min." Min flinched, his heart hammering. She had known. She had guessed who they would send. "You are here because things are breaking," Hana continued. "The climate systems are failing. The medicine is turning inert. The data flow is slowing. You believe we have sabotaged you. We have not. We simply stopped. You mistook our compassion for weakness and our cooperation for submission. You believed our values, our care for living systems, our desire for understanding, our patience, made us inferior. You insulted not just us, but the very principles that hold fragile things together." She paused, her dark eyes looking directly from the screen. "A society that cannot value the heart does not deserve the hands that hold it together. You wanted a galaxy based only on logic and strength. So we have left you to it, to your superior ways. You have the blueprints. You have the resources. You have the logic. Fix it yourselves." The message was not over. Hana's face softened, but only a little. It was not with pity, but with a kind of distant sadness. "We are not coming back. That trust is broken. But know this, we are not gone. We are elsewhere. We are tending our gardens, as you suggested. And our gardens are thriving." The screen went dark. The buoy powered down, its light winking out, becoming just another piece of cold metal in the dark. For a long time, no one on the bridge of the Whisper of Dawn spoke. The truth was a cold stone in Min's stomach. It was worse than sabotage, worse than war. It was a judgment. They had been found wanting, and the sentence was to be left alone with their own flawed creations. Tay finally broke the silence, his voice hollow. "Set a course for home." He looked at Min. "What do we tell them?" Min stared at the now black screen where Hana's face had been. He thought of the perfect healing meadows on Verdun. He thought of the silent mines on Cryos. Humanity hadn't just left. They had proven they were never really needed. They had proven the Council's entire civilization was a borrowed house, and the owners had calmly asked for the key back. "We tell them the truth," Min said, his voice barely a whisper. "We asked for a universe without heart, and now we have one." The Whisper of Dawn returned with its terrible truth. Tay and Min delivered their report and the recording of Hana's message to a silent, stunned council chamber. The initial reaction was outrage. Gurm pounded the table, declaring it an act of psychological warfare. XV argued for a military solution, find the human worlds, and compel them to return. But the cold, hard facts piling up on their datapads made such bluster feel empty. You cannot threaten a ghost. You cannot conquer a silence. The price, as Hana had named it, began to be paid in full. On Trophorn Sector 7, the situation passed beyond a glitch. The climate regulators, without Jin's intuitive tweaks, began a slow, destructive oscillation. Biome 3 was a lost cause, a frozen wasteland of dead grain. But the instability spread. Biome 5 experienced a runaway greenhouse effect, the temperature soaring until the delicate hybrid crops simply baked and withered. The Talosian grower, Crix, worked until his limbs ached, inputting command after command. But the system no longer listened. It was like shouting orders at a dying animal. The harvest for 20 systems failed. Rationing began. For the first time in generations, the core systems tasted scarcity. At the central medical nexus, the crisis deepened. With the universal nanits inert, doctors were forced to rely on species-specific treatments, which were slower, more painful, and less effective. A simple bone weave procedure for a cispran diplomat, once a 1-hour affair with nanits, now required invasive surgery and months of regeneration. The cispran survived, but was left with a chronic limp. Mortality rates for complex trauma began a slow, steady climb. Dr. Su's absence was felt in every operating room, in every recovery ward. She had not just been a technician. She had been the bridge between alien biologies, a translator of life itself. That bridge was gone. The economic fabric, woven together by the seamless data flow of Yuna's network, started to fray and then tear. The communication lag made real-time trade impossible. The grand commodities market on the financial hub of Centauri Prime, a chaotic but efficient electronic symphony, descended into discord. Deals made in one timestamp were broken by the time the confirmation arrived 3 minutes later with a different price. Trust evaporated. 2 merchant guilds from different systems, their deal ruined by the lag, resorted to a brief but violent skirmish in open space, near a transit lane, a thing unheard of in centuries of regulated commerce. Law, it seemed, required swift communication to exist, but the most profound cost was social. The council had been more than a government. It had been a cultural project, and humanity, in its quiet way, had been its glue. They had run the interspecies exchange programs, pairing a Kavani artist with a Bolian engineer to foster understanding. They had moderated the conflict resolution forums, using their illogical empathy to find compromises where pure logic saw only a winner and a loser. They had organized the festivals, the shared meals, the simple acts of connection that made a multitude of species feel like a community. With that glue removed, the differences became cracks, and the cracks became CHASMS. In the council chamber itself. A debate over resource allocation for the failing agricultural sectors turned bitter. The Tri-System Federation, facing hunger, demanded immediate shipments from the Kavani granaries, which were still somewhat functional due to a different climate system. The Kivani refused, citing their own rising needs and the principles of sovereign resource management. You would let beings starve based on a technicality? Gurn roared, his bark-like skin flushing dark. I would let no one take what is ours by right of work and planning. XV hissed back, his melodic voice sharpened to a needle's point. Your poor management is not our emergency. The argument escalated, voices rising, insults flying that had nothing to do with the topic at hand. Old prejudices, long buried under layers of diplomacy and shared projects, bubbled to the surface. Min, watching from his aide station near the wall, saw it happen. He saw GRM, in a rage, shove his heavy chair back. He saw XV rise, his slender body coiled. And then, unthinkably, Gurm threw the first punch. It was a clumsy, weighty swing that connected with XV's shoulder, sending the Kavani staggering back into his desk. For a second, There was pure, stunned silence in the great ring. Then chaos. Shouts, scuffles, the sharp crack of furniture breaking. Security drones zipped in, emitting piercing sonic pulses to separate the delegates. Min stood frozen, his gentle Illyrian heart pounding with a terror he had never known. He looked at the empty human seat. Hana had sat there, through countless heated debates. She had often said nothing for hours, but her presence had been a reminder of a different way, a calmer way. Now, that reminder was gone, and the room had devolved into a brawl. Council Leader Kale, his feathers standing on end, finally restored a grim order. The session was adjourned. The delegates left, bruised and seething. The great chamber, a symbol of unity, felt like a hollow shell. Later, Min walked the quiet, curved corridors. He passed a viewport looking out at the stars. He thought of Hana's words. A society that cannot value the heart does not deserve the hands that hold it together. He understood now. The humans weren't holding the systems together with magic. They were holding the people together. Their empathy, their patience, their care that had been the real operating system. The failing climate regulators and the inert nanites were just symptoms. The real sickness was in here, in the heart of the council itself. They had prized sharp edges and hard logic, and now they were cutting each other with them. He found Chul, the engineer, in a small lab, staring at a frozen schematic of Yuna's network code. Chul looked exhausted. "We can't fix it, can we?" Min asked softly. Chul shook his head. "We can patch it. We can make clumsy, loud versions that use 10 times the power and work half as well. But the elegance, the quiet efficiency, that was hers. That was human. We are learning to live in a noisier, more difficult, more broken universe." He gestured to the schematic. This was a gift. We just didn't know it until we had to wrap our own clumsy hands around it. The price was being tallied every day. In empty stomachs, in longer recoveries, in lost fortunes, in broken trust, and in the quiet, shameful memory of a physical fight in the highest chamber of galactic governance. The council was not being conquered. It was being forced to live with the consequences of its own philosophy. And the bill, it turned out, was far steeper than anyone had ever imagined. A standard year passed. A year of grim adaptation, of painful lessons learned in the dark. The Galactic Council still stood, but it was a wounded thing. Its chambers were often tense and quiet. The delegates no longer spoke of progress and pragmatism. They spoke of rationing schedules, of infrastructure triage, of social cohesion protocols that felt hollow. The empty human seat was no longer a point of pride or mockery. It was a monument, a silent accusation everyone tried not to look at. They had patched the worst of the failures. The climate in the agricultural sectors was stabilized, but the new systems were brutish and inefficient, consuming energy reserves at an alarming rate. Medical science had developed alternative treatments, but they were more painful, slower, and less effective for complex cases. The data network ran, but it was now a loud, clunky thing, prone to errors and vulnerable to outages. Civilization functioned, but it had lost its grace. It had become a loud, difficult, and exhausting place to live. The final humble decision was made in near silence. There would be no fleet, no demands. There would only be a plea. A single unarmed diplomatic shuttle, the last echo, was dispatched to a designated neutral world, a barren rock called Ether's Rest, far from any claimed territory. Its mission was simple. Ask for a dialogue, not to demand the humans' return, but to beg for guidance. Aboard were Min, whose gentle presence was now valued, and Chul, who understood the depth of what was lost. Council Leader Kale himself went, a symbol of ultimate humility. They landed on the gray plain of Ether's Rest. The wind whistled over bare stone. They set up a simple transceiver and broadcast their message on an old, open human frequency. It was a short message. It admitted fault. It admitted short-sightedness and arrogance. It did not make excuses. It ended with a simple request. Please, speak with us. Then they waited for 3 days, nothing. They slept in shifts in the shuttle, watching the unchanging sky. Min felt the vast, uncaring silence of the universe press down on him. This, he realized, was what they had chosen. A universe of cold, silent logic. It was a terrifying place. On the morning of the 4th day, a single ship descended. It was nothing like the blocky, functional craft of the Council. It was sleek, silent, and moved with a fluid grace that seemed to defy physics. It settled on the gray rock without a sound, 100 meters from their shuttle. A hatch opened. A ramp extended. And Hannah walked down. She was alone. She wore simple, practical clothes, a dark green jacket and trousers suited for a cool climate. She looked exactly as she had a year ago, her face calm, her eyes clear. She carried nothing in her hands. Min's breath caught. Chol stood stiffly. Kale stepped forward, his feathers flat against his body in a gesture of profound respect. Delegate Hannah, Kale began, his voice rough from the dry air. Just Hannah, she said. Her voice was the same, quiet, firm, carrying easily in the thin atmosphere. I am no longer a delegate. We have come to apologize, Kale said, the words seeming inadequate. We were wrong. Our words were insults. Our philosophy was incomplete. We see the price of that now. We are paying it every day. Hannah listened. She looked at each of them, at Kale, at Chul, and finally at Min. She gave Min the smallest of nods, a recognition of the frightened aide who had watched her leave. We hear your apology, Hannah said after a moment, and we accept it. A wave of desperate hope washed over the 3 council representatives. Chol almost spoke, perhaps to ask the question burning in all of them. Hannah continued before he could. But we are not coming back. The hope died, cold and sharp. The trust that allowed us to weave our work into yours is broken, she said, not unkindly, but with a finality that was absolute. To return would be to place ourselves in a cage of your making once more. We will not do that. We have moved on. Kale's shoulders slumped. This was it, then. The final judgment. Eternal exile in their own broken house. However, Hannah said. She reached into a pocket of her jacket and withdrew a small crystalline data chip. It glinted in the weak sunlight. We are not cruel. You wished for a universe of logic and strength. You now understand that logic without heart is a prison, and strength without compassion is a brittle shell. Understanding is the first step. The work is the next. She held out the chip. After a stunned second, Chul, the engineer, stepped forward and took it. It was warm in his hand. This is not a key to fix your machines, Hannah said. It is a mirror. It contains the uncoded foundational principles. The why behind the how, the theory of empathetic systems integration, the mathematics of ecological harmony, the philosophy of code that listens, the manuals written in your own languages. Not our specific blueprints, but the knowledge to build your own, if you choose to learn. Chol stared at the chip as if it were a living thing. This was worth more than any fleet, any treasure. It was a seed. Rebuild it yourselves, Hannah said, her gaze sweeping over them. Learn the value of the things you scorned. Let your hands grow calloused with the work of true care. Let your minds stretch to understand connection, not just control. It will be harder. It will take generations. You will fail many times. She paused, looking past them at their waiting shuttle, a symbol of their diminished state. But if you do this work, if you truly learn the lesson, Then perhaps in a century, or a millennium, we will speak again. Not as caretakers and children, but as equals who have both learned the weight of a heart. She offered another small, formal bow, the same one she had given in the council chamber a year before. But this time, it felt different. It was not a termination. It was a closing, with a possible, distant door left ajar. "Goodbye," she said. Then she turned and walked back up the ramp into her sleek ship. The hatch sealed. The ship rose, silent and graceful, and shot into the sky, vanishing into the blue in the blink of an eye. The three of them stood on the gray rock for a long time, the wind the only sound. Min finally looked at Chul, who was still clutching the data chip. "What now?" Min asked. Chul took a deep, shuddering breath. "Now," he said, his voice full of a weary but real determination, "we go home. And we begin to learn." The journey back was quiet, but the silence was different. It was not the hollow silence of absence. It was the focused silence of someone who has been given a difficult, vital task. Kale stared at the stars, no longer just points of light, but now reminders of a long road ahead. They delivered the chip. The data within was disseminated not as a quick fix, but as a new foundational text. Universities established new departments: xenobiological harmony, empathetic systems theory, galactic ethics of interdependence. Engineers like Chul became teachers, struggling to explain concepts that were once dismissed as sentiment. It was frustrating, slow work. The old, loud system still broke down. Hunger was still a reality. Conflicts still sparked, but something had changed. When a dispute now arose in the council chamber, delegates would glance, almost instinctively, at the empty human seat. It was no longer a monument to an insult. It had become a reminder of the cost and of the distant, possible future Hana had described. The arguments were still heated, but no one threw a punch. The memory of that shame was too fresh. Humanity was gone. But their lesson remained, etched into the very fabric of the council's struggle to survive. They had been given the hardest gift of all, the chance to grow up. The work to rebuild had begun, forever under the quiet, judging shadow of a simple truth they had learned too late. To insult the heart is to endanger the very foundation of your world. And they would spend the next 1,000 years proving they finally understood.